Modernist architecture may be among the more divisive, debated, and controversial architectural styles throughout history, but love it or hate it, few can contest its contributions to fundamentally shifting the way humans engage with the built environment. From Frank Lloyd Wright to Le Corbusier and Rudolf Schindler to Richard Neutra, modernist architects believed in designing spaces that blurred the lines between indoors and outdoors, tapped into primal instincts and desires, and eased the stresses of modern life, in a sense, providing architectural therapy. Because of this, many believe modernist architecture presented an early model of what designing for human health and joy could look like. The open floor plans, connection to nature, and focus on natural light are just a few of the design principles that perhaps draw so many people to this architectural style. That certainly was the case for George Smart, the founder and CEO of US Modernist, a nonprofit organization that's all about preserving modernist architecture and the stories behind it. As he tells it, he noticed a visceral change in himself whenever he would set foot in a modernist building, and he believes part of that feel-good experience came from the air of optimism that characterized the mid-century.
And modernism, which really started to take off after World War II, was also very much about optimism, that the future was going to be great. We were going to have this wonderful experience of the next 20 years. There wasn't the kind of cynicism that we often have in today's culture. Everything was going to be bright. We were going to need shades, the whole works. And you get that same kind of feeling inside a modernist house.
Now, part of George's mission with US Modernist is to give others the opportunity to experience that felt sense of optimism and joy that emerged from that era, which he does through digital content, a podcast, the Mod Squad community, and a series of ever popular events and architectural tours hosted around the world. But the deeper mission behind US Modernist is rooted in preservation, and it all started when George was searching for inspiration for a home he was planning to build.
I started this by looking for information on new houses on the internet and discovered modernist houses, which I really liked, all around Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. One of the ones I found was the Catalano house, which was built in 1954, and I was just shocked to find out that it had been destroyed in 2001. It was one of North Carolina's most famous houses. And from there, I started to make a list of other houses, both existing and destroyed.
That's become the mission of US Modernist, in part, is to preserve mid-century modern houses because they're essentially livable works of art. We started off as an interest group. About a year later, it was incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit just for the local Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, North Carolina area. In 2013, we went statewide. And in 2015, we went nationwide. So we now have two websites. One is our original website from North Carolina called ncmodernist.org. And then our national website, which is our main one now, is usmodernist.org. Well, the goal is primarily to document the houses because you can't save something if you don't know where it is and why it's important. And while there are a lot of famous houses around America by well-known architects, and we have almost all of those, there are also a lot of great houses around America by unknown architects. And so we do the best we can to find out information about those houses and include them in our online archive. This is done primarily through our magazine library, where staff and volunteers have scanned almost 5 million pages of architecture magazines going back about 130 years. So if a house was ever mentioned in a state AIA publication or a national architecture magazine, we likely have the full PDF of the issue, including photos, and it's text searchable, so you can find it.
Though George may not have known the magnitude of what he was building at the time, that digital archive has become one of the most mission-critical aspects of US Modernist. Today, that database has evolved into a living history of the American built environment and society, with records dating back to 1880. Similarly, when George started NC Modernist, it was simply to document the state's inventory of modernist architecture and celebrate the architects and designers, past and present, contributing to the movement. And as it turns out, North Carolina is a hotbed for modernist architecture.
This all came about because NC State in 1948 had a pretty dull architecture and engineering program. And so they hired a hotshot dean an all-in modernist out of Oklahoma, to come to Raleigh and put new energy in what was going to be called the School of Design. And this guy was just a star, Henry Camp Hefner. He got here and he did things they don't let deans do anymore. For instance, he fired most of the faculty. He also hired faculty, sometimes on the spot when he would meet them. No committees, no meetings, no flying people in. He just recruited like he was a championship football coach. And as a result, he was able to get a world-class program going very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that it was just in May of 1950 that he was able to attract Frank Lloyd Wright to come to the campus to give a talk.
Because of that effort, North Carolina now has the third highest concentration of modernist homes in the country, according to George. And a big part of NC Modernist work is to recognize some of the talented architects who tend to fly under the radar. And one way they do this is through their annual George Matsumoto Prize.
It's a way of perpetuating what has been a legacy of modernism into the future, because there's so much talent out there and so many architects who are yearning to get recognized.
Thanks to the work of US Modernist, architects across the country who don't tend to appear in the headlines are getting some much deserved exposure, not just through the awards, but through the experiential tours of modernist architecture that George and his team orchestrate. And while these do certainly bring attention to the architects, perhaps more importantly is the storytelling element that occurs. Being in these thoughtfully designed habitats, you experience firsthand how the principles of modernist architecture elicit joy and well being. You begin to understand how the connection to nature, natural light, expansion and contraction, and simplicity appeal to our primordial instincts. And hearing from the architects, you discover the layers of intentionality and complexity behind the design choices they made, and how those impact humans and even the planet. That education is perhaps one of the most powerful forms of preservation.
We're very happy this time to do an all-women architect tour, which I was surprised to learn that is probably the first ever in America. There have certainly been tours that featured women architects, one or two, but we had 8 this time.
One such architect was Arielle Schechter, one of North Carolina's most sought-after modernist architects. Her focus as an architect, as she puts it, is tied to climate, client, daylight, aesthetics, and net zero. One look at her modernist work, and it's evident each of these rings true. And to Arielle, these are also part and parcel of modernist architecture.
I have always loved modernism since I was a little baby. I don't know if it was because my dad was an architect, my mom was an artist. It's just something in the DNA. It's just, I always gravitated to modern art, modern architecture, loved it. I didn't like traditional growing up just naturally. It's clean, it's open, it connects to the outdoors, I think, better. So to me, it just resonates and always has.
Yeah, it really does, and that was really front and center with the home that we got to tour that you did on the Matapalooza tour. That connection with nature.
It was so important to the clients. In fact, they had chosen that site because they were so tired of living in town close to everyone where they couldn't sit outside, maybe in their bathing suit, and feel private. There were too many neighbors around. So they found that site and they said, we really want that connection. And that was the generator of the idea to make their screen porch a separate pavilion that they could go down and get away from their house. It was like a whole different experience because there's steps down to it, is closer to the forest. But it really, I tried to give them as much of the connection to nature as they wanted and needed.
You really feel that right upon the arrival experience at the home. So I was curious, what were some of the elements that you incorporated to create that connection to nature?
To me, it's all about daylight. Everything comes back to daylight, and the importance of it for people. Everybody responds to it. Every animal, or at least most animals, not all, but many respond to it. And it's just giving them the right kind of daylight and climate appropriate daylight. Because I live in the deep South and our summers are becoming hotter and hotter and more unbearable. So it's critical that I minimize the west facing glass. And that's something architects have known for thousands of years, but it got forgotten along the way. So part of that, my approach is minimize at west facing and lower the east facing glass. East facing is not as bad for solar heat gain, but it's also very hot. So I focus on south light, which everyone responds to in a good way. It moves around the house. South moves around the house every day, and you can feel the light change. And you can also, the best part of it, you can control it with overhangs. So it's like in the summer with a proper depth of overhang, you're not going to get that solar heat gain in. And a lot of modernist architecture does not use overhangs. And I love that look, but I found it doesn't protect your house as much, nor does it stop the solar heat gain factor in the summer. So it's really getting the proper daylight, proper orientation, and overhangs to control the excess solar heat gain.
Taking off from that, I was just curious, how do you think that modern architecture contributes to human joy and well being?
One of the main things I think is that modern architecture is not cluttered up with a bunch of hallways and little bitty cut up spaces. It's very open. And I really believe that that contributes to a person's well being when they live in there. I think that affects your point of view. You become more open, you become more easygoing almost. I really think it makes a difference because I've lived in all types of houses in my life since my childhood, and I'm just happier in a modern house. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be huge. In fact, I like I love a small, modest modern house. I design a lot of them because I think they age well, but I think it just gives you that kind of an open to possibility, optimism, to feel this kind of openness around you. I truly believe it.
Ariel just hit on something George mentioned earlier, the correlation between modernism and optimism. And this is not just an abstract notion. While part of this was driven by the post war optimism that defined that era, modernist architecture was based on innovation, utopia, and reimagining how people live, work, and interact. And from a design perspective, modern architecture actually keys into several biophilic design principles that signal optimism and hopefulness to our primitive brains. One of these principles is prospect, which is an unrestricted view over a distance for surveillance and planning. And when that view includes things like healthy plant or flower growth, it signals the availability of resources and optimism about the future. The other is refuge, or having places for withdrawal or retreat, places that offer a sense of protection. When these two are combined, such as a drop ceiling paired with floor to ceiling glass and an expansive view of the outdoors, the health benefits compound, and Ariel taps into this very idea.
People crave a feeling of openness. Now, that being said, as a caveat, people do like spatial variety. I'm a big believer in that. That does so an open house doesn't mean you can't have a cozy place to curl into when you need to escape the world, because I believe we can have that in a modern house too. Modern houses can definitely be cozy. I always try to include some cozy, intimate areas in my houses as well, because spatial variety is important as a person has different feelings and moods that may occur.
That do you think that modern architecture lends itself to sustainability maybe in ways that other styles may not?
I think it's absolutely sustainable. My houses are almost all net zero or net zero ready. It's easy if you orient your house the right way without that west facing glass that I'm so um, intent about. You you can control the sun that's getting into your house and overheating your house. And you can also bring in the low solar rays in the winter and warm your house up and save on your energy bills in the winter. So proper orientation of a modern house is critical. But a lot of the houses of the past, they didn't have the benefit of what we have now with building science, which building science is a relatively new field where we're studying, vapor transmission, um, the kind of insulation we need to optimize the envelope and where we need to seal so the air gaps All that stuff is so important. And the rise of building science is a great thing for the building community. And there are ways to retrofit old buildings, even non-modern ones. We can retrofit. However, it is very expensive sometimes to retrofit an old building, but I believe it's worth it. It's like if you have to change out the windows, at least change out to a great quality window that's not leaking energy all the time. There's a lot you can do. One of the great advances in the last, I don't know, couple decades is the use of what's called continuous insulation. And that is insulation on the outside of your wall, like a coat, as opposed to inside the studs. And that does an amazing job. And so it's like if you had to retrofit your whole building envelope, continuous insulation would be a great thing to consider, at least, depending on your situation. Uh, it's really a great thing, and it prevents one major terrible no-no for energy loss, which is called thermal bridging. And thermal bridging is when the heat or cold is just be migrating to the outside through either a piece of metal. Metal's one of the bad things, or a gap. So continuous insulation kind of solves that. That's a great thing. And a great resource for people is building science. I think it's buildingscience.com. And Joseph Stiebrick is kind of like the father of modern building science. And he also has wonderful details that he just gives out for free that people can use and study, and wonderful continuous insulation details that can help anybody.
Though Arielle, like many architects, may not pursue green certifications like LEED on her projects, she very much follows many of the requirements and guides outlined in those standards. In fact, she says she often goes beyond those standards.
I'm already designing net zero. I'm already trying to meet LEED recommendations. I'm already encouraging my clients to do things beyond all that, like including wildlife habitat on their projects, wherever their houses are. And one thing I really believe in is using bird safe glass. 1 billion beautiful migrating songbirds are dying every year, 1 billion in our country, by hitting glass. The bird safe glass I like has this frit in it. It's called Ornilux. And the frit looks like, to a bird, looks like a spider web, but you can't really people can't really see it unless you look right up close against it a little bit at an angle. Then you can sort of see it. It prevents about 80% of bird strikes. It is a little bit more expensive. It's so much well worth it not to hear those birds slamming into your big panes of glass, because that's one thing, Beth, about modern houses. We modernists, we do like big windows, and a lot of them. So the least we can do is to think about the birds and what we owe them as people, as creatures that could share this environment with us. The animals need us too, and we must address that in providing micro habitats for them on our projects, which only adds to the beauty of for people too. So I feel strongly about that. I mean, I feel like I go further than any environmental standard because I am hardcore.
At the Lerner Campbell House, many of these green building practices were implemented, but Arielle also used a few other modernist principles to evoke human joy.
I like to feel the sun move around during the day. So I like light from more than one side in a room. Whenever possible, I like light from two sides, and three sides is even better. And that's an ancient design principle. Somehow people have forgotten about it, or maybe it's these tract houses that are so horrible. But the Shakers did it beautifully. So that's one thing I did. And so the living room, the owner really wanted a sense of like drama. He was always saying, "Oh, please give me some drama in my living room space." So I did an inverted truss roof so that the sides kind of went out toward this view to give him that drama on each side. One side drama is to the south, one is to the north, and then the deep overhangs will protect from the solar heat gain. And then I have a little bit of light from the east, so he could feel that sun move around during the day. So that's one thing that makes a house very enjoyable to be in, is to just to be connected to the movement of our sun during the day and our circadian rhythm. I like to separate the public and the private areas in my houses so that if you want to be around your family and like a real social get together, there's a great place for that. But then sometimes people want to retreat and, just hunker down with a book and your dogs on your bed. So then I like to separate the private. So there's a way to have that kind of spatial and emotional variety in a house. So those were two things I really paid attention to in that house. The arrival was important. It's kind of like a transition for their guests to come in across the little bridge and then into an entry with a lower ceiling. Frank Lloyd Wright used to say, try to make your arrival ceilings lower to human scale, so that people don't feel dwarfed by a high ceiling when they first enter. So that's what we have in that house. And then you transition and further on into their living, dining kitchen, which has that internal drama the client wanted.
It is interesting, and when you start to pay attention, you really do feel these things when you're.
I think that's true, Beth. Yeah, you really do. And people just feel good with certain of these principles.
Back on the tour, each of the modernist homes visited that day delivered on that same feel-good experience, but each in their own way. Whether it was by blurring the lines between the indoors and outdoors, an emphasis on daylight, the use of natural materials, open floor plans, or the use of the aforementioned principles of prospect and refuge.
This house is a winner of the George Matsumoto Prize from this year, which is an annual competition that we do for new modernist houses. It was designed by Studio Becker Zoo in Chicago, and they are here today to meet with people and share the house with them.
This home, appropriately named the Dog Trot House, was designed to pay homage to the dog trot style homes that were once very prevalent throughout the southeastern U.S. The dog trot, which in this case is a 100-foot-long breezeway that runs through the center of the home, lends itself to natural ventilation for most parts of the year and emphasizes a strong connection to nature. The use of daylighting and materials like earthen tiles, southern yellow pine, and concrete also provide a grounding effect, which is felt almost the instant you set foot inside the home. Windows were also thoughtfully placed to provide sight lines to the natural surroundings from almost anywhere in the house.
This one, it looks a little more mid-century. The architect is Jessie Braverman. She's new on the tour this year, first time. This one will be more of a mid-century renovation. It's on Chicopee Trail, which has several modernist houses on it. It was a place where architects in the 70s built a couple of experimental houses.
Next up was a home by Alicia Hilton Daniel, a former paralegal turned interior designer and eventually a licensed general contractor. In Modernist 3, located in the historic Walltown neighborhood of Durham, Alicia was sensitive to the surrounding existing homes, designing a single-story A-frame volume at the front that progresses to a two-story modern volume midway through the back. The home features an open floor plan with cozy nooks to tuck away, lots of natural light, and a white oak floating staircase that serves as a metaphor to the treehouse feel of the second floor. The Pace House, designed by Aaron Sterling Lewis, may appear sleek and simple, but wandering through this home, you're met with so many delightful, subtle surprises that undoubtedly required a lot of thought and planning. From the curved walls that soften the space to the floor-to-ceiling windows on the second floor that make you feel like you're among the treetops, this home beckons you to keep exploring it. Designed by architect Rebecca Necessary, the Morris House was built on a steep and narrow lot. To accommodate the typography, Rebecca stacked two wooden volumes that thoughtfully overlapped while carving away from one another. One prominent architectural and experiential feature on the interior is the open central stair, which was designed to give the family a light-filled daily ritual of movement between the bedrooms on the upper level and the living spaces on the main floor. The striking exterior is a mix of horizontal and vertical shiplap wood siding treated with black pine tar, which has long been used in Nordic nations to naturally preserve wood that's exposed to harsh conditions. It also has deep roots in North Carolina, when in the early 1700s it became a key export for the state, which is what led to the Tar Heels nickname. The final stop on the tour brought us to another design by Aaron Sterling Lewis. This one looked like it could have been plucked straight out of Palm Springs, but it was right at home in this neighborhood of 1950s and 60s ranch-style homes, and that was very intentional. Aaron and the homeowners wanted to be sensitive to the aesthetic of the surrounding neighborhood and also pay homage to the ranch-style home that was there previously. The result was a modern twist on the classic mid-century modern design.
No video or photo can do justice to an actual visit.
To paraphrase John Keats, nothing ever becomes real till experienced. And through these tours, George has given hundreds, if not thousands, of people the felt experience of optimism and joy that resides within much of the modernist architecture.